it's Kate here, and in this video we will talk about hatching and cross-hatching, and we will also discuss the top 5 mistakes that beginners make when learning this technique. So what is hatching and cross-hatching? This is basically a way to add tone to your drawing. It's mostly to do with the classical drawing approach, where you don't just shade an area, but you actually apply tone using hatching or cross-hatching techniques. So let's start. I have an H pencil here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create hatching, adding the tone to this rectangle here, using parallel lines that are consistent in the distance one away from the other. So let's start. So I'm holding my pencil very, very gently. It's very important that you don't hold it at the tip where the point of the pencil is, because your lines are going to be very hard. So what we are striving to do here is we need to hold our pencil farther away. This is also a good way to actually use the pencil extenders if your pencils are short, like this one I have here. So you add a pencil extender on the tip so you can hold your pencil further away. And what you do is you create lines that run parallel to each other. And pay attention here. My pencil is quite sharp, so I have a sharp point here, and the tips, both at the beginning of my line and at the bottom of my line, is very soft. So I'm putting the biggest pressure basically on the middle of the line. So let's continue here. This is needed because using soft tips you can actually achieve that and make it look as if you were creating this tone in one long movement. So again, I'm barely touching the paper with my hand. Also, when you're working on a drawing, it's a good idea to either put pressure on your pinky, but it's a lot harder for beginners usually. So you can use a sheet of paper and simply put a sheet of paper under your hand so that you can draw and not smudge the other areas. So now that we have our area covered with one layer, this is called hatching. What is cross-hatching? Cross-hatching is when you add another layer on top of an existing layer, slightly changing the angle. In classical drawing, usually you would change the angle not more than 15 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the angle slightly, and I'm going to add the tone using the same pressure, the same speed, and again I'm using very soft endings for my tips. And if you have noticed, I moved just a bit higher than the first layer of my hatching, so that my next layer of cross hatching, so I'm using the same angle here, covers the area where the two layers of the first tone that we added kind of meet. So this way you can see that this area doesn't look as if it consists of two parts. So this is 1 and 2. These are the first layers, but it doesn't seem as if they are connected. It looks as if they are created all together. So what I did here is I added my H pencil. This is the second layer, and now you can see that tone is becoming gradually darker. If you want to add another layer and your pencil doesn't manage to go as dark as you want it to go without you applying very much pressure, so if I do this, so this is too much of a pressure. First of all, you leave grooves in your paper. Second of all, this is going to shine like crazy because you know that graphite shines. So I'm using the same pencil and I'm just applying a bit more pressure and changing the angle again slightly. One more thing. Here you can see that I went across the line. Why did I do that? Because in order to have, for example, if we needed this shape and we had to have very clean lines, what I would do is I would go with my cross-hatching over the edges. Then I would take a sheet of paper, and I'm going to demonstrate now. So I would put the sheet of paper and simply erase the part that I don't need. This way you will avoid the first mistake that we're going to talk about now. So this is called cross-hatching. So you can see that this is very consistent, and it looks, if you squint your eyes, you don't see any darker or lighter parts in this rectangle. So this brings us to our first mistake. I call it nails. So what are nails? I'm going to take a slightly darker pencil here. So this is a B, so that you can see it clearly. And nails are basically when you're starting your mark, putting too much pressure at the very beginning of the line. So you can see it looks like a head of the nail here at the tips. What happens is that if you use this kind of hatching or cross-hatching, the next layer that you will apply, even if you have a softer end, the softer tip of this mark, towards the end, if you continue the same way, you will see that you will have very visible break in between the two layers. So compare the kind of stitching between the layers in here and in here. So this is nails. This also happens when you try to do it from the edge, for example, like we erased here. But if I were trying to actually start my mark at the edge, you can do that, but it's a lot more difficult. You will have to do it a lot slower, and still the edge is not going to be completely straight, as in this case here. So the best idea is to actually go over the edges and then erase the stuff that you don't need. So this takes us also to the next mistake that usually beginners make, and this is gaps. So I have, again, I'm going to be using a B pencil just so it's darker and you can see it better. And notice I'm going to be doing soft edges, but in here, but notice here I have very inconsistent distance between the lines. What this does is when I am applying my next layers, if I go wide, then I go again narrow, it's still here. You can see that this is a very nice area. Here it kind of sticks together nicely. But in here, as you start cross-hatching and you start creating these gaps and the distance is not consistent, this is what you're going to end up with, holes. And the more layers you apply, these holes are still going to be visible. So either you will have to go back and correct them, but if all of your hatching is done with these kind of holes, it's going to look patchy and the tone is not going to seem consistent. Another mistake that beginners usually do when hatching or cross-hatching is loops. Notice what's happening. So I have these loops at the tips. If I change the angle, again, I have the loops, and this is going to create, again, patches of darker color. You can avoid it by practicing and slowing down your hand. The next mistake is angle. So what does angle mean? Angle means that if we selected one angle, we have to keep it consistent. So if I'm doing vertical lines, they have to stay vertical. If I selected an angle that goes slightly more to the left side, I have to keep it that way. What happens if I change the angle in the middle of my stroke is that, again, it's going to create gaps, and it's very difficult to actually maintain a consistent tone in creating hatching and cross-hatching like this. And if you're using only hatching without adding any other angles, when you start adding the layer to actually unite the layers together, if you start changing the angle, you will start creating these patches of darker tone in the middle. So you will not be able to keep a consistent tone like we did here. So it's very important to remember to keep the angle always, as you create your first line, you keep that same angle all throughout. Next is another mistake that is done very often, and I'm going to take a softer pencil here. This is a 6B, so just to demonstrate. So you can see that the 6B, if it's sharp, it gives me, even if it's sharp, it gives me these kind of hairy lines. So I very rarely use very dark pencils in my work when I'm working in graphite because of these hairy lines. So what it does is that when you're using a blunt or a very soft pencil, it's not going to give you sharp lines. And this kind of hatching, first of all, it's going to blend together. So it's going to look almost as if you're just shading it, you're toning it with the pencil in a similar way. And always remember, even if you're using soft pencils, you always have to keep them very sharp. So if I want to apply less pressure, so let's do it here. So you can see that these lines are hairy, but they're less hairy as with more pressure that I applied here. It's best to work in a range until 4B, because 4B is an optimal pencil that's going to give you still sharp but dark lines. And let's talk about how do we darken things up when we're hatching and cross-hatching. Always when you're starting out with a drawing, I suggest you start adding tone with your hardest pencil. So I use a 4H usually. Sometimes I use an H or a 2H, depending on how dark my actual drawing is going to be. But why is that? So I'm going to show you here a difference between shading with a harder pencil and then adding a darker pencil, a softer pencil on top, and going in with a softer pencil instantly. So this is a drawing that, let's imagine that I shaded with my harder pencil 4H, and then gradually I can go up to 4B, and it's going to look natural. It's not going to look very contrasting with that white underneath, because here underneath there I have the harder pencil and it's going to shine through my 4B. And if I use my 4B immediately to darken things up, actually I'm going to use, for the camera's sake, I'm going to use the 6B here that I have. So this is a 6B, and I'm going to add shading onto the white paper. So look how much contrast it's creating, and it's a lot more difficult to actually then take it into a gradual lighter tone. So here I would have to go with 10 different pencils, just trying to make it more gradual, just so that it goes into the white. Even if we add 6B over this area here, this area is going to look a lot more pleasing to us than if we were to add 6B over the white of the paper. So that's an important thing to remember, to start your shading with your hard pencils and then gradually darken the tone. And here we're going to create a gradation. So I'm going to start drawing with my 4H. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade all of this area with the 4H to start with. Now we have the first layer of our tone. So I'm still continuing with my 4H, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the paper so not to smudge anything, and I'm going to slightly change the angle as we did in the beginning. So now I'm moving lower and I'm covering the stitch between the first two layers with this same angle that I started. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the third layer, slightly changing the angle again. Okay, and now I'm going to add the same angle here at the bottom. So here I smudged a bit with my hand. What you can do is you can take a sharp eraser sometimes and you can head in the same direction of your hatching and cross hatching, just to lighten up the tone some places if you have smudged it, for example, like I did. I'm going to go once more over the whole area here. So now we have a consistent tone. Once again, I said here it's a bit darker because I smudged, but here we have the consistent tone all throughout. So now I want to see how far my 4H can actually go. So I'm going to apply just a bit more pressure. Okay, so I see that this pencil doesn't manage to go any further. So now I'm going to switch to my H pencil. So this is an H. And now we can start and add more tone without applying a lot more pressure. So I'm basically using the same pressure that I used for my 4H, but as this is a softer pencil, it's going to give me a darker tone. And now I'm going to show you a hack how to actually create straight edges if you're using hatching or cross hatching using a white sheet of paper. So this tone is the second gradation of my value scale. So from the lights until the darks. And I see already that my H doesn't work to actually intensify the tone. So I'm going to switch to my B pencil now. Here we can continue and add more pressure to our B pencil, but this is going to create grooves in the paper and it's going to create the hairy line also. So I'm going to switch to a 4B. Okay, and now you can see that here we have a darker area because of the smudge that we had underneath here. Here, as you see, I removed it with the eraser. So what we can do now, it doesn't mean that you have to throw out your drawing. What we can do now is use the same angles that we were using for our hatching, cross hatching, and simply intensify the tone to match our spot here. And usually this is as far as I go tonal wise. I don't make it darker, but sometimes when you need those occlusive shadows and maybe the darkest areas in your drawing, then you can go as far as 6B. Okay, so now you can see that we have consistent gradation in each of our sectors here. And now notice one thing. So this is why I rarely use 6B. So you can see with the same pressure that we applied to 4B and to 6B, how much more difficult it is to erase the marks that are left with the 6B. So this is the reason, because it creates dirt, basically. It's a lot more difficult to get rid of 6B than 4B. And this is the reason why I don't go as far as 6B in my drawings. So 4B is the optimal darkness, and just like tiny details and touches of 6B only in the places where I really need it. When you are creating drawings in graphite or any other medium using hatching and cross-hatching techniques, there are 4 things that you must remember. First of all is the soft tips. The next one is the consistent distance and angle. Then you need to apply the same pressure to your marks and change the pencil to gradually go darker. And also, why is it important to start with the lightest pencil you have is because it's a lot more difficult to go from dark to light. For example, in graphite, if we try here to erase apart an area, it's not going to be as white as in, for example, if we try to erase an area over here. So here I could go back to my white if I need to correct something, I still can do it, or add some highlights with my eraser, because eraser is also a tool. It's not just for erasing mistakes, but it's also a tool for creating highlights. So here it's going to be very difficult to do that, even though I used very light pressure and I didn't dig into the paper. This is basically the top 5 mistakes that beginners make when using hatching and cross-hatching techniques, and how to actually apply these techniques to your drawing. So moving from light into the dark, changing the pencils. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you found this video useful. If you did, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell for the notifications about the new videos that will be coming out. And for now, I have to say thank you so much once again, and do leave comments below if you have any questions, and don't forget to like and share the video so more people can see it. Thanks, and I will see you in the next videos. Bye!